Hi, we're going to be celebrating the festival of Shavuot very soon, which celebrates, amongst other things, but primarily the giving of the Torah, the revelation at Mount Sinai, which the Jewish people received the Torah, 5 books of Moses, oral tradition, etc. Of course, the central moment of that revelation was the Ten Commandments. And one of the questions which has been raised, and I think it's an excellent question, is when God introduces himself, he says, "I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery." And a question which people have asked, and many of the great commentaries ask, is, surely it would have been more impressive for God to introduce himself as "I am God who created the universe." You know, time, space, matter, etc. That seems to be more significant and more impressive than taking a small group of people out of slavery in Egypt. So why does God introduce himself as God of the Exodus, not God of creation? So I want to give you 5 brief answers. Answer number 1, to talk about God as God who created the world only tells me that he created the world, but it does not indicate continued involvement. Judaism believes that God is continually involved in the world. He didn't just create it and leave it, but rather he is involved. And therefore, talking about God introducing himself as God of creation, not God of Exodus, would only indicate creation, but not continued involvement. God of the Exodus indicates divine providence, continued involvement and care. That is number 1. Number 2, no one can really relate to creation. No one experienced it, no one can imagine it, and no one was there. So, however, Exodus from Egypt, the Jews themselves were slaves, the Jews were redeemed. So the people that God was speaking to had actually experienced the Exodus. We can possibly imagine slavery, we can imagine redemption. Many people have been in situations where they've been redeemed from terrible situations. That's something that a human can relate to because it happened in our in our sphere of existence, whereas creation, something totally beyond human imagination and human experience. Answer number 2. Now we come to answer number 3. God was creating a covenant specifically with the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And although God cares about the entire world, but here there was a covenant specifically with the Jewish people. Introducing himself as God of creation means that he is the God of the entire world, all of creation, which is true. But since he is now creating a covenant, a special covenant with the Jewish people, he introduces himself by something which is exclusive to the Jewish people, i.e. he took us out of Egypt. That is answer number 3. Answer number 4 is that God is informing the Jews that there is a plan to history. There is an end point. There is an end to suffering. There is an end to exile. There is an end to slavery. There's such an idea of redemption. God is introducing himself as the God of, not of creation, but the God of redemption, to tell the Jewish people a very important focus and component of our faith, which is that history has a goal, has a purpose. There will be a redemption. There will be something which will, in fact, again, answer all of the various questions, which will resolve all of our difficulties, which eventually will get us out of exile and so on. And so therefore, to introduce himself as God of creation doesn't tell us anything tells us about the beginning, but not about the end. It tells us about the creation, but not about redemption. God wants us to know him as the God of redemption. And answer number 5, I must say my favourite answer, is that God wants people to emulate him, to imitate him, to be God-like, to do what God does. Now, no one can create a world. No one can create a universe, space, time, matter. We cannot do that. But we can redeem people from suffering. We cannot create a world, but we can make the world a better place. We cannot create a human being, but we can free a human being from suffering. That is what God wants to introduce himself as. I am God who freed people from slavery, from suffering, alleviated their pain, helped the oppressed. And therefore, he introduces himself as that God to us so that we have a God that we can emulate and imitate by being also redeemers, by taking people out of suffering and slavery, and by alleviating people's pain, and by being like God. So that is the 5th answer to our question. Hopefully, maybe you'll think about this, come up with more answers for yourself, but those are my 5 for the moment. Thanks for watching.